You have spent most of your life feeling like you are watching the world from a slightly different angle than everyone else. Not better, not worse, just different. Like everyone else received a set of instructions for how to be a person in the world, and yours got lost somewhere. So you learned to observe, to adapt, to show up in the ways that were expected of you, and to keep the rest, the part of you that thinks differently, feels differently, moves through the world differently, quietly to yourself. You have probably never fully explained this to anyone, not because you do not have the words, but because every time you have tried, something gets lost in the translation, and you end up feeling more alone after the explanation than before it. Here is what psychology has been finding consistently across decades of research. The traits you have spent your life wondering about, the ones that made you feel like you did not quite fit, the ones you have tried to manage or minimize or explain away. These are not signs that something is wrong with you. They are signs that you belong to a specific and extraordinarily rare psychological profile, one that less than 1% of people fully carry. This video is not a flattering label designed to make you feel special for 5 minutes. It is an explanation for something you have been living your entire life without having the language for. And by the time we reach the fourth trait, you will understand something about yourself that you have never been able to clearly see before. Trait 1. You feel most alive when you are alone, but you are not antisocial. You can walk into a room full of people and be genuinely present. You can laugh, engage, connect, hold a real conversation. You can be warm and interested and fully there. And the moment you finally get home, close the door, and sit in the quiet, something happens. Something in you exhales. Not because the people were bad or the interaction was wrong, but because you have been running on a different kind of energy the entire time. Social interaction for you is not where you refuel, it is where you spend. And solitude is not emptiness, it is where everything restores. Psychology has studied this pattern extensively. Researchers find that people with this trait are not introverted in the simple sense of being shy or withdrawn. They are people whose nervous systems require low stimulation environments to reach their deepest level of processing. In a crowd, the bandwidth is occupied. Reading the room, tracking the dynamics, being present to multiple people simultaneously, all of that takes real cognitive and emotional energy. And when that bandwidth is finally freed up, in the quiet, in the solitude, something opens. The best ideas you have ever had did not come in meetings. They came in the shower, at 2 in the morning when everything was still, on a walk by yourself when no one was asking anything of you. That is not a coincidence. That is your mind doing what it was built to do, finally given the conditions it needs. Most people today are genuinely uncomfortable with silence. They fill every quiet moment with noise, with their phone, with something to consume, because being alone with their own thoughts is more than they can comfortably handle. You do not just handle it, you need it. And that specific quality, the ability to be alone without being lonely, to find restoration in your own presence, is one of the rarest things a human nervous system can do. Trait 2. You feel everything deeply, but almost never show it. You have cried at something no one else in the room seemed to notice. A piece of music, a stranger's expression, a moment so small that explaining why it moved you would take longer than anyone has patience for. You have carried the weight of a conversation for days after the person who had it with you has completely moved on. You have felt someone else's pain land in your own chest before they finished describing it. And almost none of this is visible to the people around you. Not because you are hiding it exactly, but because the full depth of what you feel does not translate easily into the language that most social interaction operates in. So you process it quietly, privately, in the space inside yourself that very few people ever have access to. People around you have probably described you as calm, or hard to read, or mysterious. What they are actually describing is someone who feels everything at an extraordinary depth and has learned through years of experience that not every room is equipped to hold it. Research in emotional psychology shows that people with high emotional sensitivity, the kind that registers subtleties most people completely miss, demonstrate some of the most sophisticated emotional processing of any group studied. They do not just feel more, they process more, they integrate more, they carry a richer and more complex inner emotional life than most people ever develop. The cost of this is that you are rarely fully understood. The gift is that you understand others at a depth that changes how they feel in your presence. People feel genuinely seen around you, not because you say the perfect thing, because you actually perceive them, the whole version of them, not just what they are showing the room. That is not a sensitivity to manage. That is one of the most powerful forms of human intelligence that exists. Stop here, because something needs to be said before we continue. If you are recognizing yourself in these first two traits, there is a good chance you have spent a significant amount of your life being told that the way you are wired is a problem. Too much in your head, too sensitive, too intense for most people to be around for extended periods. I want to say something directly about that. The people who told you those things were not describing a flaw. They were describing their own limit, their own inability to meet you at the depth you naturally inhabit. There is a difference between being too much and being more than someone is currently capable of receiving. You were never too much. You were simply in the wrong rooms with the wrong people, trying to make yourself smaller so that everyone around you could be more comfortable. And that has cost you something real. Stay with me, because the next two traits are the ones that most people with this personality type have never seen described accurately before. Trait 3. Your mind goes deeper than the conversation around you. You are in a discussion about something ordinary, and while everyone else is operating on the surface of it, your mind is already 3 layers down, asking questions that nobody in the room has thought to ask yet, seeing connections between this situation and 6 other things that seem unrelated but are not, noticing the assumption buried inside the obvious answer that everyone else accepted without examining. You cannot turn this off. It is not something you decide to do. It is simply how your mind moves. And for most of your life, this has had a specific social cost. Conversations that stay shallow bore you in a way that is almost physical. Small talk about nothing feels like being asked to operate at a fraction of your actual capacity. And the rare conversation that actually goes somewhere, that touches something real, that asks a question worth sitting with, leaves you feeling more alive than almost anything else. Psychologists call this a high need for cognitive depth, and research consistently shows it is one of the clearest markers of an unusually high-functioning mind. Not because depth makes you smarter than other people in a measurable sense, but because a mind that refuses to stop at the obvious answer, that keeps asking why, and then what does that actually mean, is a mind that generates the kind of insight that most people never access. The loneliness of this trait is real, because you are always looking for a conversation that matches the level you are operating at. And most of the time, in most rooms, it is not there. But the gift of it is equally real, because when you do find the right person, the right conversation, the right question worth thinking through, something happens that most people never experience. 2 minds meeting at the actual depth of things. And that, however rare, is one of the most valuable exchanges a human being can have. Trait 4. You have a moral compass that does not bend under pressure. This is the one that has probably cost you the most. You have been in rooms where everyone was moving in one direction, where the social pressure to agree, to go along, to be easy was real and significant. And something in you could not do it. Not out of stubbornness, not out of wanting to be difficult, but because something inside you, something that operates below the level of social calculation, said no, this is not right. And you stayed where you were, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it cost you something, even when it would have been so much easier to simply go along. Psychology calls this a strong internalized value system, and research shows it is one of the rarest personality traits measured across large populations. Most people's values are more flexible than they realize. They shift under social pressure. They adapt to match the room. They tell themselves it does not matter, or that it is not worth the conflict, or that they can live with the compromise. And over time, the compromises accumulate until they have drifted so far from what they actually believe that they cannot quite remember what they stood for in the first place. You have not done that, not because you are rigid, but because something in you keeps a record, keeps returning to the question of what is actually true, what is actually right, what you can actually stand behind. And that refusal to drift, quiet and stubborn and sometimes deeply inconvenient, is one of the rarest things a person can maintain across a lifetime of social pressure. The cost is that people have sometimes called you difficult, inflexible, too serious about things that others have decided not to take seriously. What they were actually describing was someone who has not yet been successfully pressured into abandoning what they know to be true. And in a world that exerts enormous pressure on everyone to conform, to agree, to follow, to fit, that is not a flaw. That is a foundation, the rarest and most durable kind. 4 traits, each one rare on its own. Together, they form a profile that less than 1% of people fully carry. The need for solitude that restores rather than isolates. The emotional depth that feels everything and shares selectively. The mind that cannot stop at the surface of things. The values that do not bend when the room pushes back. You have probably spent years wondering why you are this way, why you cannot just be simpler, why you cannot want what everyone else seems to want so effortlessly, why the path that works for most people has never quite fit when you try to walk it. Here is what psychology keeps finding about people who carry this profile. They are not broken. They were never broken. They are built for a different kind of life, one that requires more time to find, more patience to build, more willingness to be misunderstood along the way, but one that, once found, fits in a way that nothing borrowed ever could. You are not too much. You are not too intense. You are not too deep for the rooms you have been in. You were simply looking for the right rooms. And understanding what you are actually carrying is the first step toward finding them. Which of these 4 traits felt like the one you have been living your entire life without the words for? Drop it in the comments, because someone who has been carrying the same trait quietly and alone is reading what you write. And your words might be the first time they understood that what they thought was their flaw is actually the most defining thing about them.